In this lesson, we'll talk about subdividing our geometry and working with our subdivision levels. So from this point on, most of the lesson project files are going to go sequentially into the next. And so we're going to be building a project kind of going from the beginning and going through. So if you want to jump in and work with any of the project files that we provide, you can look at the number. This is 08 begin, so beginning of lesson 8. If you're following along on your own, then you'll have your own geometry that you can continue on with from that point. So this is 08 begin. This is basically our cylinder with the base deleted out. We're going to be turning into kind of a rocky ground. And so right now, if we were to go in and kind of sculpt this, and we haven't covered sculpting yet, but I'm just going to grab a brush here and start to move this around. You can see that really the only place that we can grab this and manipulate it is the points, are the points. And so we can grab the vertex and kind of move it around, but any kind of sculpted detail is limited by the resolution, because really the only way that we can move points and create that detail is where those points are. So up here on the top, there's really only one point in the middle that we can use. There's really no ability to change the shape or add any sculpted detail to the top, or even really the side. And so what we want to do in ZBrush is start to subdivide our meshes. And so what subdividing will do will be to take, for instance, each one of these quad faces, and it'll split it into 4 quads. So that's the reason that a lot of times when you're bringing in base geometry, you want to have a nice clean quad workflow, because it divides very well, divides very predictably. Okay, you can see on top of this, we have a bunch of triangles on the cylinder and a point in the middle. Okay, and so that looks fine for some low-res geometry, but once we start subdividing, it can become an issue. So let's go ahead and look at how we can subdivide our mesh. So in order to do that, it's going to be, again, in our tool palette. It's going to be under geometry, okay? And it's going to be right up at the top, okay? This kind of section up in here. There's a large button called divide. You can also hit Control D. So Control D will add a new subdivision. So it'll not only add the geometry, but it'll also smooth out the shape. So that's key as well. We're smoothing out the shape as we subdivide. And so we've subdivided one time. You can see here we now have a slider. And right now it's set to subdivision level 2. If I take the slider down, I'm now back at subdivision level 1, but you can see the shape has changed slightly. So the work that we do at upper levels will change the lower levels as well, and vice versa. All right, we have buttons for going higher res or lower res. Okay, you can also use, again, the slider. Also, Shift D will take you down in the subdivision levels, and D will take you up subdivision levels. So then at this point, you could come in and you could start to manipulate your geometry. You can see we've got a little bit more control. We can actually add some detail in the center here, but still very low res, not a lot of detail we can add. So, okay, we'll go ahead and add another level. Control D again. Now we've got 3 levels to work with, and we can work at any level at any time. So we can come down to level 1, modify it, come up to level 2, modify it a little bit more, and so forth. And so you want to get to the point where you're at a subdivision level where you can you have the ability to add the detail you want to add. Okay. Now as we start to come in here and add detail, you can see a lot of these faceting and artifacts, and a lot of this is created based on the fact that we have this pole here. So every time we subdivide, we're kind of increasing that and creating a kind of artifact in the center, and we're not really very clean up on the top. It's not really conducive to adding all of that kind of geometry. And so what we can do is actually modify this mesh a little bit. So let's take this back down to the state before we subdivided. I'm just going to drag the history bar all the way back here. And let's modify this a little bit. And we can do this by going under Subtool. Let's go to Remesh. And this will actually create a new mesh with the same shape, but it'll have a nice clean topology on it. So I'm going to set this res down to something like 64. I raise the polish amount a little bit. I'm going to turn off the symmetry, and let's remesh this. So what that'll do is create a new mesh that's about the same shape of this mesh, but you can see the top now is nice and clean. So at this point, we have a lot more ability to come in and add detail to the top of this. Okay, we can now subdivide this mesh. So Control D to subdivide. We turn off the polyframe, And you can see here, you can kind of get a better idea of the resolution, so that if I come in and subdivide again up to level 3, I can get a smoother stroke. If I subdivide again to level 4, even smoother. So we have so many more points, and now because we don't have that pole, it's nice and clean for us to start sculpting. Okay, and again, we can go up and down the subdivision levels if we want to. We can use these buttons here. For instance, if we're come down here, we want to actually delete the higher levels. We can come down to a lower level, delete that higher level. Now we're left with 3. So we have a great deal of control over the number of levels that we have. We can also check and look at the resolution of this. So right now, this is at 900,000 polygons at level 4. Okay, and so just think of that basically multiplying by 4. So here at our base, for this remeshed piece, we're at 15,000 polygons because we remeshed it, made it a little bit more high res to work from. This initial mesh was only 128 polys. Okay, but again, you have to take the edge flow into consideration. So again, under geometry, that's where we're going to be working with our subdivision levels, and we're going to go through the process of sculpting. So it'll become clear how those subdivision levels work as we actually start to do the sculpting on our meshes. But this is where you're going to deal with them. Control D to add those, Shift D to move down the subdivision levels, and D to move up the subdivision levels. Then you can delete the lower levels or the higher levels, and so forth. All right. One more thing that I just wanted to touch on real quickly is if you want to add subdivision levels, but you don't want to smooth the shape, you can come in. So let's say I wanted to add resolution, but I didn't want to smooth out the edges or anything. When you subdivide, you can turn off this subdivide smooth modifier, this SMT, and then you can subdivide. And you can see that we've now subdivided, but nothing has been smoothed out. So in some cases, that may be what you want to do. Just remember to turn that back on, and then if you subdivide again, then it'll smooth it based on your new subdivision. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. It's just whether or not you want to smooth the position of the points or leave those where they are. All right. So the next thing that we'll look at, we'll go ahead and start with our remeshed base here that has been subdivided, and let's start to look at sculpting and shaping. So in the next lesson, we'll talk about the sculpting brushes. We'll talk about Z intensity and using some of the basic brushes and start to build up our ground for our little base. So we'll go ahead and do that next.